Section 4 of Warriors of Old Japan and Other Stories by Yei Theodora Ozaki. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Daiichi, Hachiro Tametomo, the Archer, Part 2. Tameyoshi was an old man, unable to endure the hardships of a hunted life, and he found that he could go no further. So he told his sons that, as the emperor had been taken prisoner, and as there was no hope of raising Sutoku's flag again, at any rate for the present, it would be wiser for them all to return to the capital and surrender themselves to the conquerors, the Taira. They all agreed to this proposal except Tametomo. So Tameyoshi, the aged general, and the rest of his sons went back to Kyoto. Now Tametomo was left behind, alone in his brave resolution to fight another battle for the ex-emperor Sutoku. As soon as he had parted, sad and determined, from his father and brothers, he made his way towards the eastern provinces. But unfortunately, as he was journeying, the wound he had received in the recent fight became so painful that he stopped at some springs along the route, with the hope that the healing waters, a panacea for so many ills in Japan, would heal his hurt. But while taking the cure, his enemies came upon him and made him prisoner, and he was sent back a captive to the capital. By the time Tametomo reached the city, his father and his brothers had been put to death, and he was soon told that he was to meet the same cruel fate. But courage always arouses chivalry in the hearts of friends and foes alike, and it seemed to Tametomo's enemies a pity to put such a brave man to death. In the whole land there was no man who could match him in bending the bow and sending the arrow home to its mark. So it was decided to spare his life at the last moment. But to prevent him from using his wonderful skill against them, his enemies cut the sinews of both his arms and sent him away to the island of Oshima off the coast of the province of Izu to live. Lest he should escape on the way, they bound him hand and foot and put him in a palanquin. He was surrounded by a guard of 50 men, and so big and heavy was he that 20 bearers were required to carry the palanquin. In spite of all the misfortunes that had befallen him, he carried the same courage, the same stout, merry heart, the same love of wildness with him, even into exile. As the 20 men carried him along in the palanquin, Tametomo, just for fun, would now and again put forth all his strength. So great was his weight then, that the 20 bearers would stagger and fall to the ground. These feats of strength alarmed the escort of 50 soldiers. They feared lest he should act more savagely and become unmanageable past their power of control. So they treated him in much the same way as they would have treated a lion or a tiger. They tried not to anger him, but did their utmost to keep him in a good humor during the journey. At last they reached the province of Izu and the seashore from whence they had to cross over to the island. Here they hired a boat, and putting Tametomo safely on board, they took him to his last destination and left him there. Though Tametomo was banished to this island, yet once there his enemies left him free to do much as he liked. He was not treated as a common prisoner, but as a brave though vanquished foe. The simple islanders recognized in him a great man and behaved to him accordingly, and listened to everything he chose to say. So he led an unmolested life, free from care, except the sorrow of being an exile, but his was a nature which took life as it came, without worrying about what he could not help. Now one day, Tametomo was standing on the beach, gazing out to sea, thinking of the many adventures he had passed through, and wondering if fate would ever bring any change in the quiet life he was leading, when he saw a seagull come flying over the water. At first, Tametomo with his keen eyes saw only a speck in the distance, but the speck grew larger and larger till at last the sea bird appeared. Tametomo now guessed that there was an island lying in the direction from which the bird came. So he got into a boat and set out on a voyage of discovery. As he expected, he came to an island, after sailing from sunrise to sundown. To his amazement, he found the place inhabited by creatures very different from human beings. They had dark red faces, with shocks of bright red hair, the locks of which hung over their foreheads and eyes. They looked just like demons. A whole crowd of these alarming-looking creatures were standing on the beach when Tametomo landed. When they caught sight of him, they talked and gesticulated wildly amongst themselves, and with fierce looks they rushed towards him. Tametomo saw at once that they meant him harm, but he was nothing daunted. He went up to a large pine tree that was growing nearby, laid his hands on it, and uprooting it with as much ease as if it were a weed, he brandished it over his head and called aloud threateningly, "Come, you demons, fight if you will. I am Shinsei Hachiro Tametomo, the archer of great Japan. If you will henceforth become my servants and look up to me as master in all things, it is well. Otherwise I will beat you all to little pieces." When the demons saw Tametomo's great strength and his fearlessness, they trembled. They held a short parley amongst themselves, and then the demon chief stepped forward, followed by all his band. They came in front of Tametomo, and prostrating themselves before him on the sand, they one and all surrendered. Tametomo, with much pride, took possession of this island of demons and made himself monarch of all he surveyed. Having subdued the demons, he returned to Oshima with the news. Great was the praise and merit awarded him by all the islanders. Another day, soon after this, Tametomo was walking along the sands of the seashore, when he saw coming towards him, floating nearer and nearer on top of the waves, a little old man. Tametomo could hardly believe his sight. He had never seen anything so strange in his whole life. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be dreaming, and looked again. There, sure enough, was a tiny man, no bigger than 1 foot 5 inches high, sitting gracefully on a round straw mat. Filled with wonder, Tametomo walked to the edge of the sand, and as the little creature floated nearer on an incoming wave, he said, "Who are you?" "I am the microbe of smallpox," answered the stranger pygmy. "And why, may I ask, do you come to this island?" inquired Tametomo. "I have never been here before, so I came partly for sightseeing and partly with the desire to seize hold of the inhabitants," answered the little creature. Before he could finish his sentence, Tametomo said angrily, "You spirit of hateful pestilence, silence, I say! I am no other than Shinsei Hachiro Tametomo. Get out of my presence at once, and take yourself far from this place, or I will make you repent the day you ever came here." As Tametomo spoke, the smallpox microbe shrank and shrank from the form of a tiny man 1 foot 5 inches high, till only something the size of a pea was left in the middle of the straw mat. As he dwindled and dwindled, the little creature said that he was sorry that he had intruded into the island, but he had not known that it was in Tametomo's possession, and he then floated away out to sea on his straw mat as quickly and mysteriously as he had come. The island of Oshima has always been free from smallpox, and to this day the islanders ascribe the immunity they enjoy from the horrible pestilence to Tametomo, who drove away the microbe when the hateful creature would have landed there. Now that Tametomo had subdued the demons on the neighboring island, and had driven away the spirit of smallpox from Oshima, he was looked upon as king by the simple islanders. They rendered him every possible honor, and bowed their heads in the dust before him whenever he went abroad. At last this state of affairs was reported to the authorities in the capital. The ministers of state decided that it was unsafe to allow this to go on. Such a popular and powerful hero was a menace to the government. Tametomo, the champion archer, must be put down and without delay. Such was the decree. A messenger was then and there dispatched with sealed orders to General Shigemitsu in Izu to set sail with his men for Oshima and subdue Tametomo. One day Tametomo was standing on the beach and watching with pleasure, as he often did, the ever-whispering sea laughing and sparkling in the sunshine, when he saw 50 war junks coming towards the island. The soldiers standing on the 50 decks were all armed with swords and bows and arrows, and clad in armor from head to foot, and they were beating drums and singing martial songs. Tametomo smiled when he saw this fleet all mustered in martial array and sent against him, a single man, for he knew, somehow or other, what they had come for. "Now," he said proudly to himself, "the opportunity is given me of trying my archer's skill once more." Seizing his bow, he pulled it to the shape of a full moon, and aiming it at the foremost ship, sent an arrow right into the prow. In an instant the boat was upset, and the soldiers pitched into the sea. Till that moment Tametomo had feared that his arm had lost its first great strength, since his enemies had cut the sinews. But on the contrary, he now found that not only were his arms as strong as ever, but that they had even grown longer, and that he was able to pull his bow wider than before. He clapped his hands with joy at the discovery and called aloud, "This is a happy thing!" But now Tametomo reflected that if he fought against those who had been sent by the government to take him, he would only bring trouble on the people of the island, who had been so kind to him, and who had sheltered him in his exile. He thought of how in their simple reverence for his great strength they had almost worshipped him as a deified hero, and had looked up to him as their leader. No, he would not, could not, bring war and trouble and certain punishment upon these good folk. So for their sake he decided not to fight more. He looked back with the keen flight of thought that comes to mortals in moments of great crisis, and he remembered how with special mercy his life had been spared when he was taken prisoner in the Civil War. Since then he had enjoyed life for over 10 years. As a strong, brave man, he could not grudge losing it now. He had made himself owner of the islands, and the people called him their king. He felt that there was no shame or regret in dying when he had reached the height of his glory. Therefore, with firm and quick decision, he made up his mind to die. He withdrew at once from the beach and retired to his house. And here he committed suicide by harakiri, thus saving himself from all dishonor and the islanders from all trouble. He was only 32 years of age when he died. His death was greatly regretted by all who loved him, but his glory did not die with him. The people ever afterward honored and reverenced him as a great hero. Such is one story of the death of Tametomo, but legend has created another, still more interesting, about him. Instead of taking his own life, this tradition says that he escaped from Oshima and reached Sanuki. Here he visited the late emperor's tomb and offered up prayers for the illustrious dead. He then, believing that his day of usefulness was over, prepared to kill himself, when suddenly, as in a dream, the emperor, Yorinaga, his father, and all those royalists who had fought and died in the Civil War, or had been taken prisoners and killed by the victorious parties of the new emperor, appeared to him in the clouds, and with a warning gesture prevented him from committing the dread deed of harakiri. As Tametomo gazed wonderingly at the beautiful vision, the bamboo curtain which hung before the ex-emperor's palanquin lifted, and as the sunshine and grace of his majesty's smile fell upon the awe-stricken man, the sword dropped from his hand, and the wish to die expired in his breast. He fell forward in humble prostration to the ground. When Tametomo lifted his head, the vision had vanished within the clouds. Nothing remained to be seen of the royal array which had saved him from his self-imposed death. This wonderful visitation changed Tametomo's mind. He gave up all idea of seeking death, and, leaving Sanuki, journeyed to Kyushu, and took up his abode on Mount Kihara. Here he collected a band of followers, and with them embarked on board a ship with the intention of reaching the capital and once more striking a blow at the arrogant and usurping house of Taira. But misfortune followed him. He was overtaken by a storm. His ship was wrecked, his men lost, while he only narrowly escaped with his life to the island of Ryukyu. Here he found the people in a state of great excitement, for a party of rebels had risen against the king, who was greatly oppressed by them. Tametomo put himself at the head of the loyalists, rescued the king, who had been taken prisoner, subdued the rebels, and then restored peace to the disturbed land. For these meritorious services the king adopted him as his son, bestowed upon him the title of prince, and married him to one of the royal princesses. At last, one day, when Tametomo had reached a good old age, happy in the life of peace and bliss with which his later years had been crowned, as he was walking along one of the spacious verandas of the palace, his attendants noticed a trail of cloud coming towards their master from the sky. As soon as the cloud touched Tametomo, he began to rise in the air before their astonished gaze. Lost in speechless amazement, they watched the hero mount higher and higher till the clouds closed round him and hid him from their view. Such is the pretty legend of the earthly end of the brave archer Tametomo, one of the most interesting figures in Japanese history, who conquered the trials and misfortunes of his youth and won through to bright days of prosperity. He left a son called Shun Tenno, who became king of Ryukyu in due time. End of section 4.